Hey everybody, Kris White here with the American Battlefield Trust, and I am on the Fredericksburg battlefield down here in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and the sign behind me, which is a little bit reversed because I'm shooting in reverse, is telling you where I'm standing, and that's at tour stop number 3, and that's at Lee's Hill. This is known as Lee's Command Post at the Battle of Fredericksburg, called Lee's Hill afterwards, named after Robert E. Lee. And what I want to do is explore this hill with you and show you an opportunity that we have to help preserve the backside of Robert E. Lee's headquarters here on the Fredericksburg battlefield. But this is not just part of the first Fredericksburg campaign. We're going to take a look at land associated with the second Fredericksburg campaign as well. So this is a 2-for-1 deal. So come on with me as we check this out. Now we've walked just a few feet down Lee Drive. Lee Drive is named after Robert E. Lee, and it was installed by the National Park Service. This road runs roughly for 5 miles north to south along the main Confederate battle line. Portions of Lee Drive actually would run along an old road that would lead you down towards a place called Hamilton's Crossing, about 5 miles south of where we're standing. And Confederate soldiers would use that during the Battle of Fredericksburg and during the Second Battle of Fredericksburg. In fact, it was one of the main features that Union General Ambrose Burnside, and I'll tell you a little bit more about him in a few minutes, tried to capture during the first battle on December 13th of 1862. But what I'm showing you on top of the hill is actually the location of Robert E. Lee's headquarters. It looks like a little house that's on top of the hill. In fact, there was nothing on this hill in 1862 or in 1863 during the Second Battle of Fredericksburg. This is in fact an open-air exhibit shelter that was placed here in 1962 by the National Park Service. And we're going to take a walk up to it. But before we do, I just want to show just how high this commanding feature is, and it's always hard to show these natural topographical features on a video. But you'll see that we're down here in late November. In fact, this would have been the midst of the Fredericksburg campaign more than 160 years ago. The weather today is very, very similar to what it would have been during the Battle of Fredericksburg on December 13th, 1862. That day was started off foggy, but then would clear up, and it would also raise the temperature up to about 56 degrees that day. Most people think of Robert E. Lee and the Union Army down here and the Confederate Army here shivering during the battle, wearing those big greatcoats, but they weren't actually doing that. Most of them would have actually been warm, dropping their larger coats, and they would have been out here in 56-degree days. But it dips to 24 degrees at night. So you can see we're here along Lee Drive, the Confederate line, and we're going to go take a hike up Lee's Hill, which was known at the time of the battle as Telegraph Hill. But I want to show you this image by the National Park Service that is a little bit deceiving. We're going to see Robert E. Lee here in gray, but at the time of the Battle of Fredericksburg, we have a great description of what he was wearing, and I'll tell you about that when we get to the top of the hill. As I walk up the hill, and I'm not gonna make you suffer through the entire walk up this hill, you might hear some crumpling under my feet. That is not wind, that is all of the leaves that are coming down at this point. But this switchback trail, which is gonna lead us up the hill, is an easy walk for most folks. If you come out here, the Park Service, when they installed this in 1961, 1962, they made it a switchback trail to come back and forth. Now let's tell you about a little bit about the Battle of Fredericksburg. In November of 1862, the Union war effort is not going as well as President Abraham Lincoln would like in the Eastern Theater. He decides to make a command shift, and on November 7th, 1862, he installs a new commander named Ambrose Burnside. Burnside is 38 years old, and he will be the shortest tenured commander of the Army of the Potomac. That's the main Union or Northern or Yankee Army here in the Eastern Theater, at a mere 77 days. Burnside is challenged by President Lincoln to bring home a victory before January 1st of 1863, when Lincoln intends to sign the executive order known as the Emancipation Proclamation. So Burnside moves his army down from the Warrenton, Virginia area to this area here around Fredericksburg, Virginia. And he arrives here in Fredericksburg. There's no Confederates. Well, I should say there's less than 1,000 Confederates. None of Robert E. Lee's army is actually here. Lee's army spread out between Culpeper, Virginia, and the Shenandoah Valley. And Lee will have a march stolen on him, and will try to get to this area where I'm standing as quickly as possible to intercept Ambrose Burnside. He's able to do so because the Rappahannock River will block Burnside's path and there are no bridges here. So amongst these heights, this is known at the time as Telegraph Hill as we're walking up here. This is where Robert E. Lee's main battle line, or his main line of resistance, will be established by the Confederates. They'll anchor their line, and I'm facing to the north right now, about 5 miles to the north of where we're standing, on a bend in the Rappahannock River near a place called Taylor's Hill. Then from there, the main Confederate line of resistance will run along a series of heights just to the west of the town of Fredericksburg. And we know them today collectively as Marie's Heights, named after John Marie and his last name, Marie's Heights. Some folks will call it St. Marie's Heights. There's no St. Marie's Heights. It's named after John Marie. But what's interesting is that it's a series of essentially 5 hills. Marie's Heights is only one of those hills. That's Marie's Hill. But there are other hills that make this up. Taylor's Hill, some people will call as part of Marie's Heights to the north of us. We'll have College Heights today, where the University of Mary Washington sits. Then we'll have Marie Hill, Willis Hill, which is just to the north of us. This hill that we're walking up right now, that is Telegraph Hill. Today we call it Lee's Hill. And then to the south of us, Howison Hill. Then this area will start to flatten out a little bit, go into what's called the Lansdowne Valley, and then we'll have one more height, not part of Marie's Heights, called Prospect Hill, a few miles to the south of us. So Robert E. Lee, he and his army, 78,000 men, more than 250 cannon, will establish a defensive line that's more than 7 miles long here, blocking Ambrose Burnside's pathway to Richmond. Burnside never intended to fight here at Fredericksburg. In fact, he wants to move towards Richmond to draw Lee's army out, because his job is to bring Lee out into the open and to do battle, where hopefully the Union numbers, 123 or so thousand men, will be able to play against those 78,000 Confederates. As we walk up here though, I want you to notice we're switching back, left and right. We come up through a little valley and it's very wooded. I wanted you to see just how wooded this hill is. We know in December of 1862 and May of 1863, during the first and second battles of Fredericksburg, that this hill was devoid of trees, especially on this eastern side where I'm walking up right now. Because it would have done no good for Robert E. Lee to find this 243-foot high hill and then sit up here amongst the trees, right? So Lee, whenever he uses this as his advanced command post, these trees would not have been here. The National Park Service in the 1960s had actually cleared out much of these trees to bring it back to its 1862 appearance during that first Battle of Fredericksburg. But the trees grew up, as did Fredericksburg. Down below us, and you might hear some humming from some of the industrial buildings below us. This was an industrial area after the war. So to kind of block out all of that industry in front of us right now, looking out towards the north-northeast, the National Park Service allowed these trees to grow up. But they also did maintain a vista. And let's go check out that vista here from the top of the hill, and then let me show you that land we might have an opportunity to save here at Fredericksburg. All right, folks, we made it to the top of Lee's Hill. This is today the open air exhibit shelter where the National Park Service has their interpretation telling the stories of the first battle and second battle of Fredericksburg. Let me show you around just a little bit. Let me show you that vista, or at least what remains of that vista that Robert E. Lee would have obtained here from the top of Telegraph Hill. And let me also tell you why we call this Telegraph Hill. I've been referring to this hill as Lee's Hill. Well, of course, it's going to be named after Robert E. Lee because of the Battle of Fredericksburg, right? Well, at the time of the battle, this was known as Telegraph Hill because the Telegraph Road, the I-95 of its day, ran right across the property which we're trying to save today. And you're looking from the National Park Service land where I'm standing over to the property that we are trying to preserve. You can see that it abuts the National Park Service land. And in fact, not all the land I'm showing you in the National Park Service was Lee's headquarters. In fact, we know that Lee's headquarters would have expanded back into this area that I'm going to walk around here in just a few moments to show you. That is our opportunity to help expand and tell more about this story of the Battle of Fredericksburg. And in fact, it's important that this land was private property at the time that the open-air exhibit shelter was constructed here in 1962. The National Park Service would have loved to have put a visitor center atop Marie's Heights, but asking folks to walk up this hill was just too much of a challenge. So that meant parking accessibility challenges. It also meant that they didn't have the large enough footprint to place a full-scale visitor center here. So they left their 1930s era visitor center down along Lafayette Boulevard. Now I'm going to step up here, I'm going to walk through some leaves, and as we get up here, this is the vista we have today. I need you to imagine this vista in 1862, whenever Robert E. Lee is standing atop these heights. What he would have seen from here would have been largely the open plains below us. You're noticing most likely the large buildings that are down there today. That's that industrial facility that I told you about. You might make off to the top left of the screen the steeples of the churches in downtown. I can actually see waving out there in the far distance the backside of Marie's Heights, the flag that's atop Marie's Heights, and that is the National Cemetery in Fredericksburg. So Robert E. Lee from here would have seen the backside of Marie's Heights. He would see across the river where you can see that blue water tower. That is Stafford County, Virginia. The Rappahannock River's down in the valley between us. Believe me, folks, it's there. And then off to the left, we'll see some of the spires of Fredericksburg that are still exactly the way they would have looked when Robert E. Lee sat up here in December of 1862, the Baptist Church, the Presbyterian Church, City Hall. They are all still down there in Fredericksburg. But Robert E. Lee would have established his command post up here because he would have been able to see the backside of Marie's Heights and out into that killing plain of December 13th. He could see across the river towards the enemy lines. And yes, Robert E. Lee does refer to the Northerners as the enemy. He doesn't always refer to them as those people. It shows up numerous times in his writings, the enemy. To the south of us, where I'm pointing right now, he would be able to see down to an area called the Slaughter Pen Farm, a 208-acre farm you helped us to preserve in the early 2000s, and we thank you for that. And of course, beyond that, you would be able to see Stonewall Jackson's lines at Prospect Hill. In December of 1862, what will this place look like? In fact, this would have been, again, devoid of trees. We would have had at least 3 cannon right in this area, 2 10-pounder Parrott rifles and 1 30-pounder Parrott rifle. And I'm walking towards one of those 30-pounder Parrott guns. This is not the gun that sat here on top of Marie's Heights, or I'm sorry, I should say Telegraph Hill, today Lee Hill, in 1862. The Parrott rifle, this one, is sitting up here to represent one of those guns that would have been in battery, meaning firing towards the enemy, on December 13th, 1862. We call it a Parrott rifle because it's named after Robert Parrott, who came up with this idea to reinforce the breech, or the backside of the gun, with a cast iron band. One of the problems with cast iron is that air can sometimes get down into the sand molds, and whenever you're pouring that iron down into there, you could have air pockets within this iron, and it might force, after so many explosions in the breech of the gun, setting it off, the gun to explode. The gun that was up here, the 30-pounder Parrott gun, which would fire a 30-pound shell downrange towards the enemy, will actually explode. It was a Parrott rifle created at Tredegar Iron Works in Richmond, Virginia by the Confederates. They'll place this gun up in this vicinity near Robert E. Lee's headquarters. And you should know that Robert E. Lee's headquarters would not have been sitting right here on this business end of the hill. In fact, his headquarters would have probably been back over farther in on that property where we're trying to preserve today. But there's no doubt that Robert E. Lee's on the land that we're preserving, and there's no doubt he's on this land where I'm talking to you from today with this National Park Service land. And as Robert E. Lee and his second in command, James Longstreet, are standing near this cannon on the 39th shot of the day, the gun will explode in 2. It's him, Robert E. Lee, James Longstreet, and a gaggle of other officers. This gun goes up in a huge pyrotechnics display. In fact, one Confederate described the front of this gun being thrown down the front side of this hill, down into a ravine. The backside of this gun, as well as its carriage, or its tire as one of the men called it, went in the opposite direction, off in that direction towards the west. Miraculously, there were no injuries. Robert E. Lee was nearly killed up here by his own Confederate gun. Same with James Longstreet. Also during the battle, the Union Army would be firing towards us. There's fire coming from this hill. We have Confederate guns to the south of us, to the north of us, on this hill. And at one point, a Union artillery shell, that one of the men said might have been a 30-pounder shell, came crashing in near Robert E. Lee, buried itself in the ground, and does not explode. Lee, he basically will be up here and nearly killed twice during the Battle of Fredericksburg. Now, I promised you at the bottom of the hill I'd describe a little bit about what Robert E. Lee was wearing that day. Robert E. Lee, who we know to be on this hill, to be moving around here, was not clad in Confederate gray. He's wearing a blue overcoat or a greatcoat with a cape that was detachable, according to a man. He's wearing blue pants. He does have a gray coat on, but he is not what you would see on that image at the bottom of the hill. He's not standing up here in that Confederate gray head to toe. But one man who was up here in Confederate gray head to toe for the first time in the war was Stonewall Jackson, Thomas Jonathan Jackson. In the midst of the Fredericksburg campaign, his men will march onto the battlefield to the south of us, and when they did so, they came here in a snow and a rainstorm. And his normally blue uniform that he would wear, yes, Stonewall Jackson wore a blue uniform during the war, at least a portion of it, was so soaking wet that he had to put on a new uniform, given to him or gifted to him by Jeb Stuart, the Confederate horse chief here at Fredericksburg. And he is head to toe in Confederate gray with this gilded kepi on, to the point that James Longstreet starts to joke with Stonewall Jackson about his look. And Stonewall Jackson doesn't have much of a sense of humor on him, and he doesn't take it all that well. But this hill would have been the nerve center throughout the battle. This is where Stonewall Jackson would have spent part of the battle. Jeb Stuart, James Longstreet, Lafayette McLaws, Robert E. Lee himself up on top of this hill. And during the Second Battle of Fredericksburg, this hill will fall to the Federals. May of 1863, I won't bore you with all the details. The Union Army, men from Vermont, New Jersey, New York will attack across the open plain that was below us. They will attack towards Murray's Heights. They will attack towards this hill, Telegraph Hill, and they will take this property from the Confederates. The next day, the Confederates will take it back without a fight. Georgians under John Brown Gordon. So, on this National Park Service property that I'm showing you, on the property that we're trying to preserve today, this is all one battlefield. This is a boundary marker today to show you where the private property ends and the National Park Service land begins. During the battle, though, this was all battlefield. All of this. It was devoid of houses. This was just a hill with no houses, some trees on it, but in 1862 and 63, fortifications, artillery. This is land the Park Service wanted in the 1960s to make this area just a little bit more accessible for you and for me. And today we have that opportunity. And if you have an opportunity to walk up Lee's Hill, if you're able to, come on up here. You can see that open air exhibit shelter. You can see one of the 10 James Power Smith markers on the battlefield. These are nondescript markers, basically. They're much larger than they look. You're seeing the top of this, but the base of it is probably twice the size of the top here, all the way down on the ground. These are substantial markers placed in here between 1902 and 1903 at 10 points on the Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville, Wilderness, and Spotsylvania battlefields to denote famous places and actions, such as the Lee to the rear incident in the Wilderness, Lee's headquarters here at Fredericksburg, and more. So this is an opportunity for us to come here to learn a little bit more, to stand on the site of where some of the most crucial decisions of the late 1862 campaigns were made. And this is our opportunity to, like we did at Gettysburg, save one of those iconic spots that are tied to Robert E. Lee and to the American Civil War. to stand where Robert E. Lee would make one of the most famous quotes of the war, or utter one of the most famous quotes of the war. It is good that war is so terrible, lest we grow too fond of it. He stood up here and said those words, not looking in the direction of Murray's Heights, like most people think, but looking down towards the area of Prospect Hill and that slaughter pen farm, which is so aptly named here on the Fredericksburg battlefield, as he witnessed the destruction that these two armies could bring to one another. Fredericksburg is one of the greatest panoramas of the war, and I'm standing where Robert E. Lee took in that panorama.
Hello, this is Trace Atkins. Get inspired at battlefields.org.